The story began with videos that looked harmless at first. They were shaky, low-quality clips, the kind you would expect from an old phone camera or a cheap camcorder. A man, never fully showing his face, recorded himself in a small, dimly lit apartment. The furniture looked secondhand, the walls stained with years of neglect, and the lighting was so poor that much of the footage was drowned in shadows. For the first few uploads, almost no one paid attention. They had titles like A Cooking Late or Another Quiet Night, and people scrolling past assumed it was just another eccentric person documenting a dull life. But beneath the ordinary exterior, there was something deeply unsettling. Each clip included strange details that didn't fit. A padlock on the freezer door, large plastic containers stacked against the wall, a set of knives laid out neatly on the counter, sharper and larger than anyone would reasonably need in a home kitchen. Viewers who lingered long enough began to sense that something was off, though at first they couldn't say why. One video in particular caught more eyes than the rest. The thumbnail alone was enough to spark curiosity and dread. A large container, the lid halfway open, with dark stains smeared across the surface. The title was short and cryptic, just 2 words, "A Dinner Served." When people clicked on it, they were greeted by a shot of the man lifting the lid and pointing the camera downward. Inside was something pale and shapeless, not immediately recognizable, but unsettling enough to make viewers uneasy. The man didn't speak, didn't explain what the camera was capturing, but let the silence do the work. He laughed quietly under his breath before shutting off the recording. The video ended abruptly, leaving behind more questions than answers. Online forums began buzzing with theories. Some thought it was just performance art, a twisted attempt at shock value. Others insisted it had to be fake, staged with props. But a growing number of viewers couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. They pointed out small details the casual observer might have missed, the way the camera lingered just a little too long on the freezer, the sound of heavy locks clicking shut, and the strange stains on the man's clothes that looked like they'd been washed but never fully cleaned away. The channel's subscriber count rose quickly as more people tuned in, each upload dissected frame by online communities searching for answers. What unsettled people the most was the complete lack of context. The man never introduced himself, never spoke directly to the camera, and never explained what the viewer was seeing. It was as if the audience was peering into someone's private world, a world that was not meant to be seen. Unlike other vloggers, there was no attempt to entertain, no effort to engage. The clips existed only to be shown, and whoever made them seemed indifferent to whether anyone watched or not. That indifference, more than anything, gave the impression that something terrible was unfolding in plain sight. By the time the 5th video appeared, whispers had already spread that this wasn't just some strange hobby. People were beginning to suspect that they were watching a crime unfold, documented piece by piece in shaky, unsettling detail, and yet they kept watching, driven by the kind of morbid curiosity that makes it impossible to look away, even when every instinct screams to stop. The victim's story began quietly, long before anyone connected his name to the disturbing clips online. Ryan Blake was a 22-year-old college student, known for being dependable and focused on his studies. He wasn't the type to get into trouble or vanish without explanation, which made his sudden disappearance all the more alarming. On the night he was last seen, Ryan had been studying late in the campus library, his notes scattered across a table, and his headphones still around his neck. Security cameras captured him leaving just after midnight, walking with his backpack slung over one shoulder, his figure illuminated briefly under the harsh glow of street lamps. After that, the trail went cold. He never arrived at his apartment, never contacted his friends, and never showed up for class again. For weeks, his family and friends searched frantically, handing out flyers and pleading with the community for information. The police treated it as a missing person case, interviewing classmates, combing through his social media, and retracing his usual routes. But there was nothing. His phone was turned off, his bank accounts untouched, and his car still parked where he had left it earlier that evening. It was as though Ryan had simply vanished into thin air. His name made the local news for a short time, yet without evidence or leads, attention began to fade. For his loved ones, however, the fear only grew heavier with each passing day. Everything changed when the videos surfaced online. At first, nobody connected them to Ryan. They seemed too strange, too detached from the ordinary missing student case. But then came the frame-by-frame analysis carried out by online communities obsessed with the mystery. In one upload, a blurry corner of the frame showed a familiar object, a navy blue backpack tossed carelessly on the floor. Friends who had searched with Ryan's family recognized it instantly. It was the same bag he had carried everywhere, the one last seen slung over his shoulder on the security footage. Suddenly, what had been speculation turned into something far darker. Another video added to the growing unease. On a cluttered counter sat a kitchen knife, glistening under the dim light. At first glance it looked ordinary, but beneath the blade was a faint smear of red. Some claimed it was just food residue, while others insisted it was blood. Then came the most haunting clue, a brief close-up of a wristwatch lying on the table. Ryan's family confirmed it matched the one he wore every day, a gift from his father. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Online detectives began piecing together a grim narrative. They believed Ryan had crossed paths with the man behind the camera that night after leaving the library. Perhaps he had been lured, perhaps attacked. No one could be sure. What became more evident with each upload, however, was that Ryan had not simply disappeared. He had become part of the horrific world the vlogger was documenting. For his family, these discoveries were almost unbearable. The hope of finding him alive dwindled as more viewers became convinced they were witnessing the aftermath of something unthinkable. The police, once skeptical of the videos, now had no choice but to investigate them seriously. Ryan Blake's quiet life had been eclipsed by the chilling spectacle of a man who turned murder into performance, leaving behind only fragments of a victim's existence scattered across the internet for strangers to uncover. The search for the man behind the camera became a puzzle that consumed investigators and online sleuths alike. The videos revealed little at first glance, but hidden within the grainy footage were details that painted a shadowy outline of his life. The apartment where the recordings were filmed became the starting point. The peeling wallpaper, the dented refrigerator door, the faint hum of an old freezer, all of these became visual clues that thousands of viewers analyzed obsessively. Some noticed a street map hanging crooked on the wall in one upload, while others picked up on the faint sound of traffic that suggested he lived near a busy road. Still, none of these hints were enough to pinpoint him. The anonymity of the internet shielded him, and for a time it seemed he might never be found. But the man had underestimated the reach of those determined to uncover the truth. In one video, as he leaned too close to the camera while setting down a container, a reflection appeared in the microwave door behind him. It was fleeting, distorted, but clear enough to reveal the outline of his face. Viewers paused and rewound the moment countless times, adjusting brightness and contrast until the features became visible. A gaunt man in his late 20s with hollow eyes and a thin mouth that hinted at a permanent frown. The image quickly circulated, shared across forums until investigators picked it up. From there, the process of elimination began. The uploads were traced through their IP address to a house on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The property was in the name of Daniel Mercer, a man who had once worked as a line cook in several small restaurants before being fired repeatedly for erratic and troubling behavior. Former co-workers recalled his fascination with knives and his tendency to stay late, experimenting with bizarre ingredients long after the kitchen had closed. Some remembered him talking about survivalist diets and obscure recipes, his eyes lighting up in ways that unsettled those around him. Though he had no close friends and kept to himself, his name lingered in the memories of those who had crossed paths with him. Neighbors described Daniel as quiet, almost invisible. He rarely spoke, often seen returning home late at night with grocery bags that seemed too heavy for a single man to carry. Curtains in his windows were always drawn, and no one ever entered or left his house besides him. The strange hum of machinery was sometimes heard from within, though no one could say exactly what it was. He seemed to exist in his own world, unnoticed until the videos pushed him into the spotlight. As police gathered evidence, more of his past came into focus. Online accounts linked to him revealed years of activity in hidden forums, where he shared rambling posts about unusual cooking techniques and the thrill of secrecy. He spoke of food as something more than sustenance, something sacred, even dangerous. His obsession had escalated gradually from strange experiments in kitchens to fantasies written under anonymous usernames. The chilling realization was that his fantasies had not remained fantasies. The man who once stood quietly behind a restaurant counter had transformed into a figure who documented horror for an unseen audience. Daniel Mercer was no longer just a name. He was the man behind the camera, the architect of the chilling series that turned everyday objects into pieces of a nightmare. The mask of anonymity had slipped, and what it revealed was a predator hiding in plain sight whose obsession with secrecy and control had escalated into something unspeakable. When police entered Daniel Mercer's home, the reality of what he had documented came into focus with chilling clarity. The house was dim and suffocating, every surface coated in a thin layer of dust except for the kitchen, which looked obsessively maintained. There, the freezer from the video stood against the wall, its metal door scarred with scratches where the padlock had been repeatedly forced shut. Inside were packages wrapped neatly in plastic, stacked like inventory in a butcher's shop. Each one carried handwritten labels, scrawled in black marker with words that stripped away any doubt. Some were marked with abbreviations, while others bore full phrases like R, sold her a leg. The cold air poured out in a rush when the door was open, carrying with it a smell that confirmed investigators' worst fears. Forensic testing revealed what the labels already suggested. The packages contained human remains, and they all belonged to Ryan Blake. As disturbing as that discovery was, it was not the most unsettling revelation. In a back room of the house, investigators found a collection of shipping boxes stacked in uneven towers. Some were empty, others still sealed, their surfaces stained with faint smears. Tucked among them were receipts and mailing slips that traced an unexpected pattern. Daniel had been sending parcels across the country, carefully disguised as food shipments. He had found like-minded individuals in hidden corners of the internet, and to them he mailed what he described as rare meat samples. Most recipients believed they were being sent exotic cuts of game, wild boar, deer, even imported animals. They accepted the packages without question, never realizing the truth of what they were consuming. The discovery widened the scope of the case. What began as the disappearance of one student now spread into a network of strangers, unknowingly complicit in a crime far more grotesque than they had imagined. Investigators scrambled to track down the recipients, to warn them and to recover what they could, but many had already consumed the contents. Panic spread quickly when the news leaked to the public. The idea that ordinary people might have been tricked into cannibalism ignited outrage and fear. Hidden among Daniel's files was another layer of horror. On his computer, encrypted folders contained drafts of journals and plans. He had mapped out future crimes, describing them in cold detail as though he were writing recipes. He had listed potential victims by vague descriptions, noting where he might encounter them and how he might conceal their disappearance. Ryan, it seemed, had not been a random choice, but rather the first in what Daniel envisioned as a series. The videos were not merely trophies of a crime. They were the opening chapters of a twisted project he intended to continue indefinitely. The evidence painted a picture of a man who blurred the line between performance and violence. By uploading his videos, he had invited strangers to become unwilling participants, turning horror into spectacle. The freezer, the containers, the carefully labeled packages, all of it had been staged not only for himself, but for an audience he believed would grow. What no one could determine with certainty was whether Daniel sought fame or whether the act of sharing his crimes was simply another extension of his compulsion. In either case, the chilling truth was clear. Ryan Blake had been only the beginning, and had the investigation not intervened, Daniel's series of horrors would have continued, escalating with every upload. The arrest of Daniel Mercer became national news almost overnight, a story that spread quickly beyond the local headlines that had first covered Ryan Blake's disappearance. The videos, once obscure and seen only by small online circles, were now infamous. Though authorities worked quickly to remove them, copies had already been saved, circulating in hidden forums and dark websites where people traded them like forbidden trophies. For the public, the case became known simply as the Cannibal Vlog, a phrase that combined horror with the unsettling reminder that it had all been willingly placed online for strangers to see. The trial revealed details that left the courtroom stunned into silence. Prosecutors presented the freezer packages, the shipping records, and the encrypted files Daniel had written about future victims. The defense tried to argue that Daniel was delusional, detached from reality, but the videos spoke louder than any testimony. Jurors sat through clips where everyday objects became symbols of terror, forced to confront the fact that Daniel had not only killed, but also crafted his crime into a performance. The verdict was inevitable. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, a man stripped of freedom, but not of the notoriety he seemed to crave. For Ryan Blake's family, justice felt incomplete. They were left with memories of a young man whose life had been consumed by someone else's obsession. The reminders were everywhere, the backpack glimpsed in one video, the wristwatch shown briefly on a table, the forensic labels that reduced a son and brother to cold description. No sentence could erase the knowledge that Ryan's final days had been turned into fragments of content, dissected by millions of eyes long after his death. His family withdrew from the spotlight, unable to bear the endless retelling of his story in articles, documentaries, and online debates. The wider public reacted with fear and fascination. Conversations about internet safety surged, with many pointing out how easily a predator had used a platform meant for harmless sharing to broadcast something unspeakable. Others obsessed over the case, dissecting every frame for clues about Daniel's psychology. Some even began mimicking his style, uploading grainy, unsettling videos that hinted at violence without ever showing it, blurring the line between tribute, hoax, and potential threat. Authorities struggled to determine which uploads were harmless imitations and which might hide genuine danger. The possibility that copycats could emerge kept the case alive in the public consciousness long after Daniel's imprisonment. Whispers grew online about new accounts that seemed to echo Daniel's style too closely to be coincidence. Shaky footage of dim kitchens, freezers humming in the background, and containers sealed shut appeared sporadically, each time sparking speculation. Were these simply imitators capitalizing on fear, or had Daniel inspired a network of like-minded individuals waiting for their turn in the spotlight? No one could answer with certainty. The videos were reported and taken down, but they always seemed to return in some form, feeding the idea that the story had not truly ended. The cannibal vlog case remains a chilling reminder of how horror can exist in plain sight, hidden behind the ordinary glow of a screen. It is not only the brutality of the crime that lingers, but also the ease with which it was shared, consumed, and replicated. Even as Daniel Mercer sits behind bars, the echoes of his actions continue to ripple outward, reminding everyone who dares to look too closely that sometimes the darkest stories do not stay confined to the past. They return, reshaped and reborn, waiting quietly for their next audience.